Intro's going for you.
Okay.
Jeffrey Deskovic, I know a little bit about your background. It's an amazing story. It's inspiring. I was able to hear a few of your podcasts, watch your Amazon video. It's also heart-moving. You were wrongfully convicted of a rape murder when you were 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You did 16 years in prison.
Correct.
For a crime you did not commit.
Right.
You go through that journey, you get out, right? You get exonerated. There's a DNA, it doesn't match, but you do 16 years, you get out, you change your life, you dedicate your life to helping those who are wrongfully convicted get out themselves. You have the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation that does just that. I'm in awe of your story. If you wouldn't mind just sharing with us a little bit about you and what you've been through.
Sure. Well, that's a great summary. I was 16 when I was arrested. That was for murder and rape, which I didn't commit. They were able to extract a false confession out of me after interrogating me for 6.5 to 7 hours. Ultimately I was arrested. I turned 17 by the time the trial started, which I lost. The wrongful conviction was caused by the coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by the medical examiner, terrible public defender. I did lose 7 appeals. I got turned down for parole. Ultimately, I lost despite the DNA not matching me. And I got exonerated through further DNA testing through the DNA data bank, which not only affirmed the prior result, excluding me, but it also identified the actual perpetrator. So my charges were dismissed on actual innocence grounds, and he was subsequently arrested and convicted. The actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed a second victim just 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case.
So to go back into your story, I don't want to go straight into, that whole scenario of going through being charged with the crime you didn't commit, a horrible crime that you didn't commit. I want to talk a little bit about your childhood growing up.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. How was that?
Yeah, that was good. I felt like in some ways I was kind of like an all-American kid. I mean, I was middle class. I grew up in Peekskill, which is Upper Westchester County in New York, so it was middle class. It was ethnically diverse. I kind of lived 2 lives back then. I didn't really think about it that way, but there was my life after school where I was very popular, and there was a lot of kids that lived in the apartment complex and the areas nearby. And for the most part, whatever I would suggest would usually be what we would do. We're going to play video games. We're going to play Monopoly. We're going to swim, play basketball, play stickball, play football, whatever it is. But that was after school. In school, that was a different set of kids. I was more quiet. I was, to myself. And I could say that dynamic really was from grades 2 through 8, and then ultimately, in high school.
What were your dreams as a kid?
Well, I dreamed about being a cop, ironically, when I grew up. That was pre-teenage years. I mean, in my teenage years, that changed. My mother had a personal injury attorney, and I remember meeting him a couple of times, and I remember he made an impression on me. I mean, he was well dressed in a suit, in the long coat, the attache case. He appeared to be well paid, well respected, and so I wanted to be an attorney based off of that.
What was your first memory of love for you?
Wow. I haven't gotten that question before. I want to add one other thing. Growing up, I have a brother that's 3.5 years younger than me, so it's me, my mother, my grandmother, and my brother that lived together. First, you said my first impression of love. Well, I think I was in like first or second grade, and in my mind I had a girlfriend. In reality, probably not. I don't think it would count as that. I had someone I had a crush on, and I think that she. I still remember her name, by the way. Her name was Katie Cook.
Yeah.
So, and I did. She knew I liked her, and I think that she liked me. But first or second grade, it's not really anything to do. There's no dates to go on.
Fast forward to high school, right?
Yes.
Before the wrongful conviction and that
The
kind of
false arrest.
melee that ensued.
Right.
What was the calm before that storm? What was your life like right before then?
Yeah, it was kind of the same as a kid. I mean, but in school I was quiet. I was to myself. I was kind of on the fringes of the society there. I mean, I guess you could say I was a nerd. I mean, I was kind of picked on at times, but after school, again, there was I continued to be popular amongst the kids after school, and so we would play a lot of sports, just nothing organized. So I feel like I was having my best year academically. The first year in high school, it was not good. But then, I could have passed if I went to summer school. But I knew if I did that, then I was going to be in with the same kids that picked on me that whole year, and I didn't want to do that. So I purposely didn't go to summer school, so that I would get left behind, which is what happened. I was, so I don't think I was like picked on anymore. I wasn't like in the in crowd, but
Right.
but it was at least I wasn't picked on. So I had actually skipped a grade. Like in first grade, I was skipped from kindergarten to second grade, and I feel like that kind of caught up with me in high school a little bit because I really wasn't, into going to parties and chasing girls and underage drinking. That really wasn't my shtick at that point in my life.
Would you mind sharing with us the first instance of you being a suspect, quote unquote?
Yeah, so I was on my way to high. I lived across the street from the high school. There was really only two ways to get to the high school from my house, and out of the two, I would really have had to have gone out of my way to take the other route. So it wasn't hard for the police to figure out what direction I would be coming in. And I was on my way up Fremont Avenue in Peekskill, and I got halfway. It's like a hill, and like about halfway up, these two men, they were undercover detectives that got out of an unmarked car, and they had on long trench coats, and they shouted my name out, and there was about like 5 or 6 minutes where I wasn't quite sure that I believed who they were. I mean, at that time, people getting kidnapped generally, there was just general information that was put out there. Hey, don't talk to strangers. Don't get in a car. Don't hitchhike. It was right around that era where those safety protocols were a societal thing. And so after they eventually convinced me that they were cops, when they showed me the radio, inside their car. And then they said, look, we want you to come down to the police station, and they told me it was about the Correa murder, and they wanted me to help them. And I said, well, I don't know anything about it, so I don't see how I can possibly, be helpful to you. But they wanted me to come and be helpful anyway, and eventually I agreed. So I got in their car, I went down to the police station, and they they started out friendly, and then they got very aggressive with me. They showed me a lot of photos of the crime scene as well, and they started accusing me. And when I got up to leave, that's when, and they did the good cop, bad cop routine. When I got up to try to leave, one of the other detectives said, well, how is that going to look if you storm out of here? So now I had to sit back down, and, all told, everything was from approximately 9 in the morning to maybe like 1:30, 1:45. But I remember I left. I remember being fearful, and I went back to the high school. I found my social studies teacher. I told him what happened. He brought me to the principal's office. They called my mother. We had a meeting. The next day, my mother brought me to see a lawyer in White Plains. Ultimately, we couldn't afford to hire him. I mean, he wanted $50,000, and we just simply didn't, just for a retainer, and we just simply didn't have that kind of money. But I remember my mother didn't want me to speak with the cops, so I stayed away from them. But they eventually reinitiated contact with me. They called one of my best friends and had him call me, and I went down to the police station, and that's how they re-engaged with me. But I want to share quickly that, being 16 years old, that's really the age where there's sense of autonomy, struggle for freedom, that as you go through adolescence to young adulthood. So there's usually, a little bit of tension or rebellion, the kids and the parents. So I think that was kind of a factor also. I mean, I thought I knew better than my mother, of course, at 16. And, they're claiming they want me to help them. And, I didn't do anything. What could possibly happen if I do go down and speak with them? And so I used to go and meet up with him periodically without telling her. And again, I thought that I knew better than her, but obviously I didn't.
And you thought you were doing something good. You thought you were helping out the
Police.
police.
Correct. Yes, that's exactly right.
And then essentially they use everything against you, which is
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And again, they encouraged me. They said things like, kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. So let us know if you hear anything. Stop in for time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. So I remember once they asked me to guess, well, what kind of keys do you think that, what kind of key ring do you think that she had? So I'm just thinking, well, I know that she's from Colombia. She's been here for a year and a half. Maybe one of the I Love New York type of keychains is kind of a logical thing. But, I'm not taking it to mean that they're questioning me like a suspect and they're testing to see whether I have some sort of guilty knowledge. You're asking me a question. I mean, my guess is not suspicious any more than what their guess might be. But that's not how they were looking at it. So I meet up with them for about 6 weeks like that. And eventually, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. They said, look, we got some new information in the police file. Want to share that with you. That will allow you to be even more helpful to us.
mm-hmm.
But you got to take and pass the polygraph first. And then they said, look, if you pass the polygraph, we can also stop looking at you as a suspect. See, all my interactions with them had the dynamic. They'd start out questioning me like a suspect, and when they'd push hard, I'd get frightened and I'd want to get away from them. That's when they would switch it up and they'd do the Jeff as a junior detective helper routine. So they kind of kept me off balance. They overreached me in that way. And I think that the good cop, bad cop dynamic where one officer pretended to be a friend, the other was more aggressive, I feel like that was a factor that they used against me because I had come from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life at all. And so in time, I began to look at the officer who was pretending to be my friend as a father figure.
So you take the lie detector test. Did you pass or did you fail?
They told me that I failed. Well, let me point out that
They also had you souped up on caffeine.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
A 16-year-old, 17-year-old souped up on caffeine.
I'm souped up on caffeine. Yes, so I go to Peekskill Police Station for the polygraph test. My mother and grandmother think I'm in school. It's a school day. But instead of them giving me the test there, they drove me out of county 40 minutes away by car.
Mm-hmm.
So which meant I couldn't leave anymore on my own. I was dependent on them. They put me in the car with the cop who was by myself with the cop who was pretending to be my friend. So psychological games continue. The bad cop and lieutenant, they're in a different vehicle. The polygraphist is a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator. So he's dressed like a civilian, and he never identified himself as law enforcement. He never read me my rights. They gave me I don't have no lawyer present. They don't give me anything to eat. They do give me a 4-page brochure which explains how the polygraph works, but it's got big words in it that I don't understand.
Right.
But I figure, well, I'm there to help the police. What does it matter? Let's just get on with it. And from there, they put me in the small room. They do the coffee routine, which you correctly allude to. And I wasn't a coffee drinker, by the way, at 16.
And if it's the first time drinking coffee, it's going to have you wired.
Right, and they gave me many cups of coffee. And then he literally wired me up to the machine. And then he launches his third-degree tactic. So he invades my personal space. He raises his voice at me. He keeps asking me the same questions over and over.
How did that feel as a
16-year-old?
Yeah.
It felt very intimidating because I frankly wasn't used to talking with adult males because I had the distinct absence. There was no father figure. I didn't see my uncles all that often either. So it felt very intimidating. I mean, it was unusual just to talk to an adult male, much less someone who was acting, like that, and then he's in my face. And so that was a frightening experience. And he keeps that up for like 6.5 to 7 hours. I think he walked out of the room for like 2 or 3 minutes twice, but other than that, it was a nonstop thing. And then he comes in and says, What do you mean? I guess he was exasperated by this point, by not being able to get me to confess. So he says, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. And that really shot my fear through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he told me, look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do that anymore. You got to help yourself. Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16, I wasn't thinking about the long term. I was just concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life because the fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else did either, it loomed
You
rather
wanted
large.
it to be over with.
And I wanted it to be over with. So I made up a story based on the information they gave me that day and the 6 weeks run up to it. Ultimately, I wound up collapsing on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. The interrogation was not videotaped. It was not audio taped. There was no signed confession. It was just the cop's word for it. And when they came to court, they left the threat and false promise out of their story.
So that's essentially the evidence that is used throughout your case to convict you.
Correct.
Beyond that, you also had a incompetent public defender.
Yes. Yeah, let's get into that just a little bit. He didn't interview or call as a witness my alibi. He rarely met with me. Every time I tried to explain to him what happened in the interrogation room, I was innocent. He was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that that proved that the confession was coerced and false. He never cross-examines this medical examiner. Medical examiner, when the DNA didn't match me, came up with a story. He said that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence which he claimed showed the victim was promiscuous, because that was the prosecution's answer to the DNA. Well, she was sleeping with everybody, so no wonder the DNA doesn't match you, but you're still guilty, which all was a lie, by the way. She wasn't sleeping with anybody so far as I know. And then when it comes to the confession, sometimes he argues to the jury that I never confessed at all. Other times he argues that I did confess, but that it was coerced. And other times he's saying it's a false confession. So you can't make all these different arguments.
So it's an incompetent defense.
It's an incompetent defense, yes. And ultimately I was found guilty and I was given a 15 to life sentence when I was sent to a men's maximum security prison.
While you were going through that trial, even you as a kid, could you sense that your lawyer was giving an incoherent defense by just throwing darts at the board and seeing what fits?
No, I did not. I was completely in over my head, and he kind of made it worse because when I wanted to involve my mother in a conversation with them, or even one of my uncles, we had to discuss things like, well, am I going to testify or not? Or do I want to have a jury trial? Or do I want a bench trial, which is decided by a judge? He wouldn't allow me to have an adult in the conversation. And I remember one point, very vivid. I don't even think I've mentioned it on camera. The questions really haven't called for it, but we're talking now, and it brings to mind. I remember when I was asking him about, well, are you going to call my alibi? What's your strategy? What are we doing here? And he said, look, you're the client, I'm the lawyer, okay? I'm the adult, you're the kid. You already thought that you were smarter than adults already once, okay? And you see what that got you, right? Just sit back and let me do my job. So at that point, I did just that. I regret that I did just that, but I did just that. And, I really didn't perceive that anything was going wrong, But I think also another factor, though, is my family really believed in the court system, and many people over many months, because it was about approximately a year between the point of arrest and when the trial happened. So I had been told many times, the court system's going to get it right. They're going to see that there's no evidence against you. You're going to be found not guilty. All this stuff is just going to be a bad memory. So over time, I came to believe that. And so, that ties into your question about, did I perceive that he was doing a bad job? No, I was just caught under that delusion. And I think on some level psychologically, I mean, you almost have to think that, right?
That he's doing a good job?
Yeah, and that the case is going to turn out okay. Do you think that you have to? I mean, in some ways,
I
or
think
maybe you have a different opinion. Tell me what you think.
I think if you have a public defender, yeah, I think you know that, okay, you might be screwed a little bit. Yeah,
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
But if you don't have any experience with the system, that is completely, you're probably oblivious to that.
Okay.
And there are good public defenders out there.
Right.
It's just, I think the odds of you getting one that is really going to fight for you is very slim, because the public defenders work, they're in the same buildings as the DA. They're buddies, and like,
Right.
they're doing what they got to do with their caseload, and they prioritize their own caseload. And it's just where you stack up on there. So I'm never confident in a public defender.
I agree with you.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I sometimes think in hindsight, a really good third-year law student could have won my case.
A passionate
Law student, yes.
who believes in your innocence, definitely.
Correct.
So you end up getting convicted to 15 to life for rape.
15 to life for rape and murder.
For rape and murder.
Yes.
And you probably don't know what that stigma brings with you in the prison system yet, right? As you're getting convicted, you don't know that this is a big red flag in prison.
Correct.
So how was it, the conviction and then the realization of the baggage you then carried because of that going into the prison system?
Yeah, during the time period between I think my first glimpse of that was the time period between conviction and sentencing, just in the county jail. But also when I got to the prison, I remember the guards asked me when I arrived at the Elmira Correctional Facility, they said, well, do you want protective custody? I'm like, well, what's that? And, well, if you decide that your life is in danger, which you might decide that based on the charges, and we can't protect you unless you tell us you need protection. And the only way we have of doing that is if you agree to go to protective custody, and that would mean that you'd be in your cell 23 hours a day out of the 24. You're not going to be able to go to any kind of school or any kind of vocational programs. Your recreation will be 1 hour a day by yourself in the day room. Use the phone, use the shower, but you're not going to have any interaction with people. And I stopped and considered that for a brief second, and I couldn't fathom being in a cell. I wasn't used to being in a cell, first of all, and I want to share, I was in the forensic unit at the county jail. It's like a mental health setting within the jail. So that's like a dorm setting, and you got to come out in the morning, and they actually lock you out of the dorm rather than you being locked into the cell. So it's kind of like an opposite. My point is, it was a foreign thing, and it was hard to adjust. So I couldn't imagine. I mean, what they just said sounded, I couldn't, even worse, like I was going to make things even worse than it already was. So I quickly decided on the spot, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I've been found guilty of something I didn't do. So many things had to go wrong in order to get to this point. The odds of any one of those things happening seem to be astronomical, but yet it's all happened, and I'm here. I'm not going to agree to make my condition worse. I'm just going to go to the general population and take my chances. And if somebody kills me, well, I guess I don't have to worry about doing the rest of this life sentence now anymore. That was my line of reasoning. That was my line of reasoning as a 17-year-old. So I
like that line of reasoning.
Yeah, it turned out well for me. Yeah. So that was an inkling that further fleshed out the realization of that red flag of being in prison for a rape that you mentioned, and then a couple of the old timers said, look, you don't talk to people about your case, and you can't be telling people what your charges are or anything like that. So if I was ever asked what was I in for, I would use a prison slang, which meant I was there for a murder.
How was that though? When did the reality of the prison sentence while you were in prison really set in? Like, man, I'm really gonna be here.
Yeah, I know this is gonna be crazy to say. It set in year 15. And I'm going to tell you how. So initially, I thought I just had to hold on for a year or two to the next appeal, which I was sure I was going to win because I'm innocent. I still believe in the system. So I lose 7 appeals, but that takes me through 11 years, though. And then once my
Kept you
appeals
busy for 11 years.
kept me busy for 11 years. Right, exactly. And I didn't focus on the sentence. I just focused on just the year or two to the next decision. Then the only way, when my appeals are over, the only way back in a court is if you can find some new evidence. So it was about writing letters now, trying to find someone to take my case for free to help them find some evidence. Because again, I didn't have any money to hire an investigator or an attorney. So I wrote letters for 4 years, and I'm still thinking that any one of these letters, could be the one that sets in motion a chain of events that culminates into my getting the representation I need and eventual exoneration. And 4 years of writing letters, mostly not getting responses other than the occasional no. Then I changed my focus and I just start looking at parole as a potential way of regaining my freedom. And then when I got turned down for parole, largely because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, that's when I thought, I guess I'm going to be here the rest of my life, because I knew a lot of people that had the 15 to life sentence and they went to the parole board and would get turned down and go again and then get turned down again, and just I had life at the end, which meant they could keep denying me parole, from now to the couch come home. So that last year was most difficult for me. I remember I had placed the ad in the newspaper, just desperate for outside contact. And I also had the ulterior motive that I was hoping that at some point the conversation would work its way around. And by the way, what are you doing in there anyway? And that was going to be my time to do my shtick and try to convince them, and maybe they could turn into a champion and connect me to the legal help I needed. Right? Yeah. And so I was asking this stranger, well, do you think I should give up? Should I just commit suicide? I'm never going to get out of here. I was asking the stranger that out of nowhere, just to give you an idea of just how, what a desperate place I had managed to crawl into at that point.
So year 15 is when the reality of I may be in here forever.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Because as you're sharing that, I'm equating this with like dreams and people's dreams, and your dream obviously immediately is to get out of prison, to be exonerated, to be in the clear, and you do that for 11 years and it keeps you busy, and then slowly you're realizing like, hey, this might not happen.
Right.
And then as you're realizing that, it gets really, really maybe tougher for you or bleak.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I also know that, I guess in that time you have somebody visit you who's a lawyer and essentially tells you, hey, you're going home.
Yeah, at the end, yes.
But in that moment, it's almost like you're still shocked that you're so tired of believing that you're going to go home, that the system's going to work, that you're going to be exonerated, that you don't believe it because you don't want to have that disappointment again.
Yes, that is correct. Yes, my lawyer came to see me towards the conclusion of near the end of the 16th year, and she says, and I'm hyper vigilant because I'm looking for the slightest sign that anything is out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
Because that normally spells disaster.
Yeah.
And she says, and sure enough, she says, oh, the items have been tested. Well, what do you mean the items have been tested? It's not supposed to be tested for another month or two. No, the DA pulled some strings and the items have been tested and it matched the actual perpetrator. You're going home tomorrow. And I'm like, no, I'm not.
And this is when you've already kind of
resigned
yourself.
I've already resigned myself, yeah. And I've been so beaten down. I'm afraid to hope anymore at this point. And my head starts spinning. She's holding my hand, and all these thoughts are running through my head, one thing after another. One thought has nothing to do with the other. And I'm articulating it out loud. And every now and then she cuts in and says, are you ready to talk about tomorrow? No, we're not talking about tomorrow, not entertaining that, not going home. Don't play with me that way. No, we're not talking anything about tomorrow. And so that happened a few times, like 3 times, and eventually what made it real is she looked up at the clock and said, "Look, visiting hours are almost over. There's a lot of work to be done between now and tomorrow with the media. I need to get your clothing sizes so the staff can get your suits. You can appear in court presentable. And that made it feel real, and I felt better for 5 minutes. And of course, a different fear or thought comes in my head. I thought, well, something's going to happen between today and tomorrow. They're going to change their mind. They're going to do what they always do, which is, fight and win. Yeah.
Which is a valid thought.
Which is a valid thought, considering that history, if what had gone on to that point.
You said you were tired of hoping.
I was afraid to hope. I was afraid
to hope.
Yeah.
Afraid to hope.
Yeah, because the disappointments hurt too much. That was like being wrongfully convicted all over again.
I was in prison myself. I was guilty as charged.
Okay. Right.
But I remember walking around the prison yard, and I was talking to one of my older homies, and I was on a maximum security yard as well. And he had a life sentence, and we ended up talking about hope, and he was in there for an actual murder that he did commit. And he said that he looked me in the eyes and he was like, why hope? Why keep on hurting yourself like that? And my homie who said that, he was resigned already to the fact that prison is his life. And when he said that, it made me think, and I went back to my son. I still think about it to this day, why hope? And for me, the answer is because to hope is beautiful. It keeps that what if something great does happen, that hope for a better future, for a better you, for a better life, and you can strive towards that. But when you're in a cell block with a life sentence, what's there to look forward to?
Correct.
So I definitely understood where he was coming from, but I choose to hope, right? Because we can have hopelessness even in regular society.
Yes.
With mental health and all those things.
Yes, you can. Sure.
So I want to know, how do you hope now? How's that hope in you now?
So I think it's a quiet, unspoken tension in my own mind.
Yeah.
Because, how do you have goals or aspirations or things that you want and not have some hope in it? But I would be lying if I told you that I don't still feel like a inner trepidation or a inner fear that, something's going to go wrong of one minor thing or another, and I'm going to end up getting screwed. I'm going to end up being hurt. I still have that. That's still, even now, 18 years removed from wrongful imprisonment, I still have that fear, that one thing, that dread. If I'm afraid to hope at times. Well, even I do hope, but there's that tension, and I do have that concern that, one glitch or another, one thing or another is going to happen, because that's really what happened in my case. I mean, if you think about it, and again, I've never done this.
It's like out of nowhere, yeah.
Right. It's I look back at history, and from the cops just asking me to give opinion, and I'm having a conversation, and that gets misunderstood, at least by the jurors, right? Not by the cops. They're manipulative. They know exactly what's going on, but at least as far as the jurors, that's twisted around. That's misunderstood, and and then in the courts, when my I had an attorney that was representing me in a habeas corpus petition. This was the one and only time I had a paid lawyer. People came in the picture that my mother didn't know before, and everybody decided to put in a manageable amount of money, so we hired a private lawyer. I naively thought that that was going to make a difference, that the court would actually give a objective decision and objective analysis. That's all I needed. You know, I felt like it was just a knee-jerk reaction, rubber stamp denial to the proceedings to that point. But I figured, well, that wouldn't happen. Then I have a paid lawyer. And then, despite assuring me that they were going to meet the deadline of filing, you know, they took it all the way down to the last possible day, where now the misinformation by the court clerk to them regarding the filing procedure, you know, what day it had to be there, is enough to push that over the edge. And so now my petition arrives 4 days late, which the district attorney's office urged the court, hey, just rule he's late. And that's what happened. Now they ruled I was late. I lost that way. You know, and that ultimately...
So disappointment after disappointment after disappointment stemming from that huge wrongful conviction.
Right, and continuing on that way, and even, you know, each letter that I sent out during that 4-year time period, I mean, you know, my hope, my dreams rode on that letter. That was my way of fighting, and, you know, and to... Often I wouldn't even get a letter back. It just, when enough time passed by, I figured, well, I guess I'm not going to hear from anybody. And then ultimately, you know, with the parole board, I mean, they ended the parole interview. I was asked a question about aggression replacement training program that I had taken, and I articulated the answer. And that's when the commissioner said, well, that's good, Mr. Deskovic, because you're going to need those skills when you return back to society. Good luck. So, like, I walked around the prison for the next 3 days thinking that I had somehow defied the odds and that I would be going home. So, another disappointment as well. So all that stuff, you know, counted.
It still left its mark.
It still left its mark. Yeah.
But gathering from the stuff I've watched about you, and you're still pretty hopeful, and at least a scrappy hoper.
Correct. I'm still a scrappy hoper. Yes, that's a great way. Yeah. No one's phrased it that way, but that's spot on. Yes, you're right. You're right.
You get released, and then you're thrown into society.
Yes.
I know that's a big shock, right?
That is.
After 16
years. Yeah,
16
correct.
years?
Yes.
It's like, okay, here you go.
Yes.
How was that?
That was like a fish out of water that was from the fire into the frying pan. Yeah. You know, I'm going to put some color to it, though. So I'm in a totally unfamiliar world. So technology is different. GPS, cell phones, internet hadn't been created before. Culture's different. And neighborhoods, you know, look different. There's some familiar houses and structures, but many others that are not. So cumulatively, those three things made it feel like I was in like a parallel world, a world I didn't belong in.
Surreal.
Surreal, yes. It was awkward when I'd meet up with my extended family because the overwhelming majority of them never came to see me, and the few that did, it was very few and far between. And then there was psychological after effects, of course. You know, it's normal to have PTSD, panic attacks, anxiety, feeling of processing things at a slower speed, feeling of having been frozen in time. So I was released when I was 32, but I felt like I was 17 because that's the age that I was when I was last free. So I had that physical / mental disconnect, if you will. I was always passed over for gainful employment. You know, it felt like nobody had any patience for on-the-job training. They all wanted job experience, which I obviously couldn't provide. And then also, yeah, of course, I was released with nothing. You know, you can bring a lawsuit. That's a legal process. It took 5 years before I got anything. And it was, I had particular challenges because the age that I was in prison. It spanned from years 17 to 32. Those are very important developmental years. There's a lot of rites of passage. So I had never before lived alone. I hadn't had a driver's license. I never went shopping before, wrote a check, or had to balance a budget. So all those things made it particularly challenging. And then it was just lonely. So it was very difficult. There were a few times that I felt like I wanted to just go back to prison. That I don't belong out here. I don't know anybody out here. This is not my world. I don't understand how the world works out here. At least there I understand where the environment is. There's people to socialize with. To a limited extent. I have people I play basketball with, play chess with. These are the people that like to play ping pong. They're down there. The people that are like sports, they're over there. And I kind of, people that, the card players are down there. And I kind of was able to float and navigate, but I wasn't able to find like the counterparts to those people in prison. I wasn't able to find the counterparts to those people on the outside, tying into it was just being lonely.
Or a rhythm.
Or a rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the difficult. I lacked stability of housing. I mean, I did catch on as a weekly columnist, but it was only a weekly newspaper, so they only wanted one article a week. I was making money doing speaking engagements, but it's not a consistent form of income. So I did lack stability of housing at one point, coming a couple of weeks from a homeless shelter. But there was a dean at Mercy College, now Mercy University, and they gave me a scholarship to finish the bachelor's. So I had gotten GED, associate's degree, in a year towards the bachelor's while in prison at the time that funding was cut for college education for prisoners. And so it made it into a news article as a human interest item associated with my wrongful conviction and release. So the dean saw that, and so she prearranged a scholarship for me at Mercer University. And I feel like that was kind of like an intervention for me, because rather foolishly at that point I was thinking, well, I'm too old to go to school. That ship has sailed. But actually it didn't. But I didn't really have anything else I was doing. I was completely structureless. So
Yeah. Did that school begin to give you that structure?
It did. It did. I had to go to classes. There was homework due. They allowed me to live on campus, which is how I avoided the shelter. I had the meal plan. And then
during all this, how pissed off were you at the system?
I was pissed at the first week. And at the end of the first week, I felt, like this is like destroying me.
Yeah.
I have to let that go. I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. I can't do that if I'm angry or bitter. I've lost so much already as is. Why would I want to, in effect, lose the rest of my life? It's not like I'd be impacting the people that had a hand in what happened to me if I was angry or bitter. And so I would really be the only loser in that scenario. And the vehicle that allows me to actualize that is I take the energy I felt and channel it into the advocacy work. So that's the other thing I was doing. At the same time, I'm destitute. I have all these difficulties, but I'm going to school, I'm writing, I'm speaking, I'm meeting with elected officials. I'm trading privacy for awareness by doing media and ultimately new media interviews. And so after about 5 years, I was financially compensated. I used some of the money to start the nonprofit, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which would continue the work I was doing as an individual, but be involved in trying to free people, which is not something I could have done as an individual. So I used some of the money to do that. And so seeking to help people in the same position I was in, and then also the policy aspect of it, trying to prevent what happened to me from happening to others through passage of legislation aimed at fixing those gaps in the system, the cracks through which innocent people could fall. So that was in 2011. And, so from then to now, we've been able to get 15 people home. I did not get into law school, so I decided to get the master's degree. I thought the extra credential would make me a better advocate. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction, causes, and reform. And we started having the success I just shared with you, and I ultimately decided I got tired of sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to represent some of the clients, make some of the arguments, so I made a second attempt. This time I got into law school, and as we sit here now, I'm a practicing attorney. I have a caseload of 9 cases. I've entered some of the cases that got started that predated my law license, so I've entered some of those as co-counsel to second seating more experienced lawyers. But there's also a couple of cases where I'm the lead attorney just for the experience, so I have the more experienced guy just deferring, but just for the experience there. So it's I find it very empowering. I feel like it's opened a lot of doors. I mean, of course, it was in pursuit of the dream of exonerating others as a lawyer. So a couple of years ago, I was co-counsel. We overturned Andre Brown's conviction. He was in for 23 years. So it was in December, actually, and he came home a couple of weeks before Christmas. So he got to spend that with his son, with his daughter, with his wife. And then I want to say a couple of months ago, also working as co-counsel, we exonerated Thomas Schaefer. He was wrongfully convicted of a 4th-degree grand larceny. So, like I said, I have the cases there, and we're doing policy work now in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. I would like to briefly just describe the measures that we're advocating for. Okay. So, coerced false confessions have caused wrongful convictions in 29%, DNA-proven wrongful convictions. So there's a bill that we're advocating for which would mandate that the police record custodial interrogations. So now they have to record them, but not in sex offenses, homicides, or drug cases. So we're trying to get rid of those exceptions. The Youth Interrogation Act, which would give kids 17 and younger that they have a non-waivable right to counsel. So you would have to speak to a lawyer to explain your rights before you could decide to waive your rights and speak to the cops. Because most kids don't understand their rights. I certainly didn't. And then there's the police deception bill, which would ban police from lying to suspects in interrogation, recognizing that that's coercive. So in Pennsylvania, it's one of 12 states there that does not compensate people if you've been wrongfully convicted. And then in California, we're working on passing an oversight commission on prosecutor conduct, like the bill that we got passed in New York. So we're part of a national coalition group called It Could Happen to You, which I'm an advisory board member of. The foundation's in the coalition, and actually their founder works for me also as the policy director, so we co-brand, and it's worked very nice. So we have those, we have stakeholders in each state, New York, Pennsylvania, and California, but myself, the founder, and one other person are common to the rest of it is made up of people that live in that state. So we are working on those reforms while we're working on 13 cases, 9 of which I'm an attorney in.
How has been the upkeep of your mental health? How have you been able to stay the course and from doing prison, wrongfully convicted, 16 years, living with that, there being a stigma that has to be in the back of your head, right?
It is.
Especially if you're in prison, innocent or not, and then getting out, and then the reintegration, that is a whirlwind of a whole lot of shit.
It was. You're right.
And how'd you keep the fight going?
Well, I think in terms of what I'll divide my answer in half between in prison and then after that. So in prison, definitely belief in God was one thing. A second thing was, I just try to concentrate on just the next appeal, the next move. I went to the law library a lot. That gave a sense of empowerment. I found things to throw myself into. I took all the educational programs that I could. I completed a lot of vocational trades. From 1998 to 2006, I read 3 or 4 nonfiction books a week in my cell. When if I wasn't doing legal work, I was reading nonfiction books. 1998, they allowed us to purchase televisions in the cell in Elmira. So my TV stayed off for the most part, but I did watch certain programs every week. So the use of delusion as a survival tactic comes into play, and one of the ways it manifests itself is through the TV. If when I was watching certain programs every week, I would kind of delude myself while I'm visiting with friends, or if I'm playing basketball or ping pong or chess, I'd pretend I was a professional player. And but it wasn't like kids fooling around on a playground someplace. It was my mind needed to leave the prison for an hour or two, and so the usage of delusion, and I think euphemisms come into play. You know, it's not the prison guards, it's the correction officers, and it's not the prison warden, it's the superintendent, and it's not I'm going to my prison assignment in the morning and my prison assignment in the afternoon. I'm going to school or I'm going to work. So those things all those things were part of it. There was another prisoner there named Frank Sterling that was innocent also, and we kept each other going for 13 and a half years. We would get together every 6 weeks, and half the conversation would be about how do we continue on morale-wise, and the other half would kind of be a brainstorm session about what's the next move. I wanted to share that Frank was exonerated through DNA testing a couple of years after me. He did 18 years, so it wasn't that I was naively believing he was innocent just because I happened to be. The pen pal showed up at the right moment in that last year. We talked about that before. So on the outside here, I'm a proactive type of person, so I think having that mindset is still a belief in God, and then also, you know, I think if you're looking for some kind of, if you need a door to open or some kind of miracle to occur, I think you have to work really hard, put yourself in a position where something can happen, rather than, I'm not a pie in the sky, do nothing, it's just going to drop into your lap. I don't think the world works that way. And so I'm proactive, and I start to think to myself, you know, when I feel like I can't move on anymore, I just say to myself, you know, maybe this is the key moment right now. Maybe I'm on the verge of a breakthrough. But if I quit, it's not going to happen. So even though I can't move on anymore, I'm going to do it anyway to see what happens on the other side.
It's maintaining, that's hope, right?
That's hope.
Still
Yeah.
Maintaining,
That's that scrappy
hope.
That's that
scrappy
scrappy hope.
you know?
Yes, it's true. I want to share also that, you know, I feel fortunate. There's so many other innocent people in prison that have not made it out. A lot of other people that haven't had the same educational opportunities that I've had. You know, at least I made it out of there, you know, mainly in one piece in my mind, you know. And so I feel like a moral responsibility to
Give back,
to do everything I can on behalf of the other people, you know, as opposed to just, you know, being on an island someplace. I mean, if I wanted to, I could live a vacation from now till I drop dead 50, 60 years from now, but there really wouldn't be any meaning in that, you know. And I make sense of everything that happened to me I believe that I went through what I went through in order to do the work that I'm doing now. And so with that, you know, I do the advocacy work. It's healing, it's cathartic, it makes a difference.
It's the best therapy.
It's the best therapy I can get. I feel like I can. It makes my suffering count for something. And, you know, with that, I have a level of inner peace. I know what my role is in the world, and that kind of anchors me.
I do want to touch, and we don't have to expand on this if you don't want to.
Sure.
You said one of the things that kept you going in prison was your belief in God. And I had read this elsewhere about you as well, and
Sure.
you only say it very briefly. It's never expanded on.
Right.
You know, my immediate thought was most people in that situation would blame God.
Right.
Especially if you're innocent.
Right.
There's a lot of guilty people in there who blame God.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. That is true. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think as someone who's innocent, if somebody has an honest gripe,
yeah.
it would be you.
Right.
and it can easily, like, you could still all do all these things that are amazing, but you could still hold on to a little bit of bitterness because, right?
Yeah, you could theoretically do that, sure.
But
Look,
how did you not blame God? How was your thought process in that? How did that work?
yeah, well, there were times where there were times where I was angry with God, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. Yeah, but I mean, number one, I didn't feel like he was getting me anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
And secondly, another thing is, I I felt like I wasn't as alert when I was like in that mindset, and
Mm.
I think at some point mentally, most of us, certainly was true for me. I mean, most of us don't we have to believe that God is going to somehow bail us out in the end? He's going to somehow get us through that? Because if there's not, then what is there?
Mm.
So I feel like that belief that he would somehow get me through. I feel like I needed to believe that just as a matter of survival.
Yeah, definitely.
And a lot of people turn to God. I mean, it's all over the place in the prison system. I mean, different, what specifically the beliefs or religions or stuff are, that varies, as you know. But a lot of people are clinging to that in prison in one form or one faith or another.
Yeah, even if just to keep their mental fortitude in there.
Correct. That's exactly right. Yes.
I also saw, we're gonna wrap up soon. One of the things I saw on your Amazon Prime video, it's called "Convicted Jeffrey Deskovic."
A
Right?
conviction. Yes.
Conviction.
Yes.
It's amazing. It's a quick view too.
It's 21 minutes. It's
20,
short.
21 minutes.
Yes.
It's a short. When you were talking about the injustices of the system and your first person experience of them, of the things that didn't match up, somebody's prison sentence for this crime, for drugs, versus somebody's sentence for a murder or
Yes.
violence,
Yes.
and
Right.
I'm outraged when I hear that, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm watching that, and it does make me mad because it does make me think of the way the system's set up, and that there is a good level of unfairness. That if you don't have money, you don't really have good counsel.
Correct. Yes.
And I think if anyone goes through that, it would infuriate them too. But most
Right.
people are on the outside looking in.
Mm-hmm. Whereas I was on the inside, kind of looking out. Right. And so at times, though not always, I'm kind of fast on my feet sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, not always, but often.
Yeah.
And so I remember when we're filming, and I remember at that part, and I made the conscious decision, right? I'm thinking to myself, well, look, this documentary is about me, so that means automatically wrongful conviction is going to get some play. Okay, I want to try to seize the moment and throw some attention to some non-innocence justice reform issues,
Right.
and I was hoping, because I was just hoping, because I didn't edit the film. I'm not the producer. I'm not the director. I had this much editorial control over anything. I'm just going to throw out on camera what I can and hope that it survives the cutting room process and what makes the cut of what's in. So I figured I want to use some of this platform that I have to bring some attention to those issues. And I talk about over sentencing. I talked about the sentencing disparities, like you're talking about people. If you're caught in possession of this much drugs rather than this much drugs, it's a felony, it's a misdemeanor, and if it's the felony, then you might get 15, 20, 30 years.
People doing life in there.
Doing life for that, and that's more time than if you killed somebody. You could plead guilty to manslaughter, get a 5 to 15, to 8 1/3 to 25. And you have less time than, I saw people that were doing life for those large sentences on drug possession. I saw nonviolent offenders in prison. I saw people there with serious mental health issues that were often talking to themselves, and they were housed in the mental health wing. Some people got better as they got off of psychotropic medication rather than on. It was just so obvious to me that prison was really ill-equipped to deal with that prison wasn't going to fix them. It was just going to make them worse, that they really belonged in a mental health setting. And, my sense from 50,000 feet away was that the purpose of the psychotropic medication was not so much to treat people as it was to maintain sedate them and make a more orderly running of the prison. I talked about the health care and how terrible that was, and how the prison medical staff, their answer to everything was to give you over-the-counter medication and come back. And it would often take a month or 2 months to see the doctor. I mean, you see the nurse, you don't see the doctor. I mean, my finger, I can't straighten my finger. I mean, I remember I was playing basketball. I caught the ball at an awkward angle. The back part went back here, and I went right away to the sick hall, they call it. You saw the nurse, and by the time I got to see the doctor a month or two, it had kind of like fused in place. And now I can't. And he said, well, you have some usage of it. I'm not authorizing. I'm not signing the paperwork so that they have to spend money to take you to an outside doctor to treat you. Just using that as an example of the overall. And, seeing how while that had to do with the general medical care in prison, how it was particularly inept when it came to the advanced medical needs of older prisoners. I mean, people on dialysis in a wheelchair, literally hunched over on a cane. Just parole. I talked about a little bit about the need for parole reform. I mean, so many people there that were serving as role models, literally living in honor block, completed vocational programs, therapeutic but yet the only thing that seemed to matter when they go to the parole board was what they were convicted of already. And so just to be denied and have that cycle continuing, compassionate release, I mean, which is, if you're determined by the prison medical staff to be terminally ill, then you can apply for early release so that you could die with some dignity, free with your friends and family, and in a non-prison environment. But that they were so slow in making those decisions that sometimes people would have passed away, and then the decision comes, or or they get the decision, and then it's just down to like a day or 2 days, and word reaches back. But all those things, I mean, just how there didn't really seem to be much of a serious effort at curtailing, limiting, trying to prevent prisoner-on-prisoner violence, and the nasty attitudes a lot of the guards had towards the prisoners, and there was no real oversight there. The people in authority were once doing that themselves, and the hesitation of the courts to intervene. So all those things that I either was exposed to or that I witnessed were all deeply disturbing to me, because that's far outside of what the scope of punishment is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, the punishment is supposed to be a loss of your freedom, not to be mistreated while you're there. Speaking of which, I want to just quickly mention as we near the end, I do want to mention there's a couple of bills the foundation does advocate for, not in the lead, but in support in terms of parole reform, fair and timely parole, which is a bill that would require the parole board to cite one additional factor other than nature of the crime if they decide that they're not going to parole somebody. I mean, because to be denied based on just what the crime is, I mean, that's almost a complete abandonment of any belief in any kind of rehabilitation or a second chance. And it, frankly, is demotivating. A lot of people said, Jeff, why should I bother to take these classes? You change. They're just going to deny me anyway. And then the companion bill, the elder parole, which is a bill that if you've done if you're 55 and you've done 15 years minimum, that you would be entitled to a parole board appearance, not a guaranteed release, but just an appearance in contemplation of being an early release. And that's based on the idea. Well, first of all, the number 55 comes from the Department of Corrections, which recognizes if you're 55 and you've done 15 years, you're considered to be elderly, just taking into account the impact of incarceration on health and how it accelerates aging in the body. and how the prison, the medical care is not equipped. But a lot of people also are not the same person that were 10, 15, 20, 30 years before that. I know a lot of people that, didn't. I thought they were safe, that that nothing really good was gonna come from an additional 5 or 7 years left on the sentence minimum. The only thing is he going to be just older? That's the only difference. So I feel like those bills are important, and rather than having to pay to incarcerate people, we could instead have them pay into the tax base. And we know that there are formerly incarcerated people who have added to society when they come back, working as drug counselors, working with at-risk youth, working in homeless shelters, working in nonprofit settings, and otherwise, maintaining a crime-free life. And just, I feel like as a society, as a wrap the answer up, we lose out when people who could be safely released are not, and then the impact on family also, mothers, fathers, and kids.
What do you say to the people who say, well, they're prisoners, they deserve that, most of them are guilty?
My
Who
answer,
cares about them?
yeah, my answer would be yes. I agree with you that most of my answer would be I agree with them that most of them are guilty. But we're talking about a fairness. We're talking about reforming the system in a way where if someone really is rehabilitated, that they could be released instead of just continuing to incarcerate. And look, at the end of the day, they are human beings. Now, are there some people I met inside that I would never want to see on the outside? Yeah, sure, there's some, but that was not the overwhelming majority. But I think I think at the end, if we don't value if we don't value rehabilitation, then we're discouraging people from reforming. And the other key thing I'll come back to, not only is it meant for a fair evaluation of whether someone's rehabilitated or not. Remember, they can still deny; they just cite an additional reason, but also just the recognition that some people are over sentenced from the beginning, so it's kind of like a leveling off.
Yeah, I like to
It's not like
think,
they got away with crimes. They still did time in prison. No one. I'm not talking about anyone getting away with it.
yeah, I mean, I don't think we have a focus on rehabilitation. I mean, there's a lot of talk about rehabilitation.
Correct. Exactly right.
There's a lot of
Exactly
talk
right.
about rehabilitation, but when you get in the prison system, it's kind of like survival is king. So your survival is going to be paramount. But since there's so many people in the prison system, you can't really, it's just the infrastructure isn't there. A quick answer to that is we shouldn't incarcerate the bullshit crimes that we talked
Correct.
about.
I agree.
And then at that point, you can focus much more clearly and specifically on rehabilitation systems. But when you just have all these prisons overcrowded, all you're thinking about is, okay, we just got to manage.
Correct.
But there's so many people in there. I mean, I had a dude who was doing life in there for a joint.
Right.
He got caught smoking a joint in prison, which doesn't matter. Does that deserve a life sentence?
Right. Yeah, I don't think so. No,
not at all. Which is why it is outrageous. And these nonviolent crimes getting the disparity in time and for what they did.
Correct.
But it roused me up a little bit too. So
I'm glad that it does. Honestly, I'm glad that it does. I'm hoping that it riles up, viewers as well.
The last question I want to ask you is for you to give your advice. You have been through a lot of adversity. As a kid, I already know 16 years in prison, there's going to be consistent levels of adversity. And then even as you got out.
Right.
what is your advice to somebody else going through it, whether it be externally, internally, mentally, emotionally? What is your advice to them?
All right, so two things. I've thought about my life and all those different phases you've talked about, and my advice is have a goal. And the goal could be overcoming that adversity, by the way. So have a goal, have a realistic plan. You know, you should be able to look at it 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, yes, I could see how that might work. Be flexible. Remember that the plan is not the goal. The goal is the goal. So don't be afraid to vary. Work really hard, and no excuses. There might be reasons why something is harder. No reason why you can't accomplish it if you work hard enough. If you leave it all out in the field, so to speak, and never give up. And again, when the moments come where you can't go on anymore, that's your key moment, and you got to say to yourself, this might have been when I was on the verge of a breakthrough. So I'm going to keep going even though I can't, just to see what's on the other side. And then once you cross the bridge, you've got to reach back and bring someone else over it. In my 18 years of freedom, I've seen that apply to far more situations than just wrongful conviction or even just imprisonment, period. I've seen it, I've seen people that work with homeless population that used to be homeless. I've seen women that are working with women who are domestic violence victims. I even once saw there was a woman that had been previously was sexually trafficked, and now she has a nonprofit and is doing work on behalf of other women that are sexually trafficked. So I've seen that. So I know that whether it's a discrimination or if it's a racism or some other thing, but I've seen people reach back from those populations. And so if we have people doing that are overcoming challenges, then I think that you make your suffering count for something. You get some healing. You make the world a little bit better, and we need to get more people doing that.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.